Our next guest and speaker was deeply involved in the conversion of power plants in his country from coal to biomass, and thereby the transit. Well, hello.
Hello.
What's up? Here he is. I suppose you're Anders Nordstrm?
Yes, I am.
Well, very nice.
You.
Let me just continue introducing you. Do you mind?
No.
No, you
please
can
go
stand
ahead.
here. It's fine. So basically what I was saying is you were very involved, were you not, in the conversion of coal to biomass, basically, in your country. Why don't you tell us the rest, actually? Anders Nordstrm from Ørsted, everybody, and your title is COO and Senior Vice President.
Thank you. And very honored to be here today in front of you. Just briefly introducing what I'm going to talk about today. So basically, I'll try to shed a little bit of light on sort of the challenge that we face in the decarbonization of shipping across the value chain. But first of all, for those who doesn't know Ørsted, we are the largest developer of offshore wind in the world. We build around a third of all offshore wind turbines globally. We are also a major developer of onshore wind and solar PV across Europe and North America. And we have also added the sort of newcomer to the business, or which is power to X, as we call it, or rather sort of green fuels and green hydrogen. And the reason we've done that is basically that our vision is a world that runs entirely on green energy. And electricity is a big part of that. You should electrify as much as you can, but there are major sectors like shipping which needs green fuels. And for that purpose, you need sort of indirect electrification or bio conversions. And that's why we have, with being active in electricity, why we have added sort of the e-fuels part to our business. But let's maybe jump ahead. So what is the challenge, actually, just to take the step back and look at some numbers? There's around 100,000 vessels out there in the world that needs to run on something else than fossil fuels. That's a pretty massive number. And they use around 300 million tons of fossil fuel. So we are really addicted to oil, basically. And that needs to change, and as rapid as possible. And the shipping sector is accountable for around 3% of global emissions of CO2, which needs to be gone by 2050. So that's a bit about the challenge. And it's, of course, massive. But let's try to double click a little bit on it and sort of break the problem down. I've tried to draw up a simplified value chain in shipping. And I'd actually like to start at the right-hand side of it. So everything we're doing here in terms of decarbonizing shipping is about net zero. We want to get to net zero as fast as possible, at least by 2050. We heard earlier that we are now not on track for the 1.5 degrees. We're not even on track for the 2-degree scenarios. We're actually overshooting, so we're in a bit of a hurry. But there is a sort of general commitment to net zero by 2050, and there is a consumer expectation or societal expectation that we get there. So the challenge is really, how does that expectation trickle backwards into the value chain and send the right signals? And in terms of shipping, well, consumer needs for green shipping should translate into how the cargo owners basically get their goods shipped. And I think there is this famous example that Maersk has mentioned, that a pair of sneakers in a container shipped from one end of the world to the other, basically the additional cost for the consumer of doing that is around 5 cents. So for the end consumer, actually the additional cost of going green is insignificant. However, it's about that signal traveling backwards. And then the cargo owners, of course, the shipping companies are moving their cargo. So they need to buy the green fuels. They need to also invest in new ships. So they have quite a transition to make, which is not easy. It's new things. Those fuels have not been used before at scale. And similarly, for them to buy these fuels, they need to be available in ports around the world. So the ports needs to make these new fuels available. Again, new tanks, new characteristics of the fuels, new ways of operating. And at the end, the volumes need to be available out there. So we, as a producer, need to invest in production facilities. And the challenge here is, of course, that in an existing market, well, we could probably look at projections and say, okay, the market will grow at X% per year, and then we could sort of invest based on those assumptions. But in this market that doesn't exist, we need visibility as an investor that the market will develop. So therefore, the ends of the value chain also need to meet. So there's challenge along the value chain, and the sort of across the value chain, one of the challenges is that it needs to happen at the same time. And therefore, there are so many moving parts that need to come together. So that's the challenge, and that's a bit sort of the dark side of the, or the not so positive, that the challenge is massive. On the other hand, we are actually seeing things happening now, which is the good news. So let me switch a bit to that. We have seen the IMO actually change its strategy regarding greenhouse gas emission reductions. So now there's a net zero target by 2050, and there's actually adoption of green fuels or near zero fuels already by 5% target by 2030, which is of course a massive change to where the previous strategy landed. And we are also seeing not only targets, but actual legislation coming in place in the EU. It's actually a lot of things has happened this spring in 2023. So the Fuel EU Maritime basically sets CO2 or carbon or greenhouse gas emission reduction targets from 2025 onwards. Of course, smaller in the beginning, but accelerating. And it also sets a green fuels target by 2030. And if we don't arrive at it by 2030, it increases further by 2033. That's coming in place, and we are also seeing that basically now the maritime sector has come under the ETS in Europe, the CO2 emissions trading scheme, which of course makes the reference, the fossil fuel, more expensive, which again helps the green fuels to the market. And this is the European angle. If we look across the pond to the US, we've seen the IRA coming in with massive support for production of green hydrogen and green fuels. So things are starting to move. And the signal, well, that's a signal, of course, to the industry, but also the industry seems to be responding to this signal, which is extremely positive. So we are seeing massive new orders of methanol dual fuel ships. Actually, this last quarter, Q2 of this year, the orders for dual fuel methanol ships were higher than the orders for LNG ships, with around 45 new announcements for ships. And see, you can see the curve sort of looking as an accelerating curve, which is signals out there that things are happening. However, production also needs to happen. And as Ørsted, we have tried to lean forward in this value chain on the production side, basically by taking final investment decision on a 50,000 tons per year e-methanol project in Örnsköldsvik in sort of 500 kilometers north of Stockholm, which will be operational by 2025. This will be, although 50,000 tons per year doesn't sound of much, it will be one of the largest e-methanol plants in the world to be operational by that time. And hopefully many, many more will come. But everything needs to start somewhere, and it needs to start by concrete action, basically. And this is what we are trying to achieve. So when we say we want to be a front runner in this space, we actually mean it. And the project has been developed by Liquid Wind, which is a Swedish developer, from whom we have bought the project and we are now executing. And Liquid Wind has a pipeline of further projects in Sweden and elsewhere. And actually, Sweden has a lot of things going for it in this new industry on the production side, because of availability of fairly cheap green electrons, as well as green CO2 or biogenic CO2, and basically also infrastructure, etc. But Sweden is not the only place where this is happening. We are also developing a project in the south of US to produce 300,000 tons of e-methanol, because these fuels need to be available not only in one place, but across the major sort of shipping lines. Again, it's not going to happen from one day to the other, but there are initiatives going on across the globe. And then basically, Sweden in general, looking currently a lot of renewable electricity coming or available in Sweden, and also looking forward a lot of new coming. We are focused on the offshore part of it. We actually have a pipeline of 18 gigawatts of offshore wind capacity we are developing. The first project is 1.5 gigawatts connecting into Skåne, outside Trelleborg, which only awaits basically the government's final nod. It's received the environmental permits, etc. But Sweden has a huge potential in the Baltic Sea to actually sort of utilize or generate power from offshore wind. And of course, you have a mix of with a lot of hydro in the system already, as well as a lot of onshore developments. And then there's the nuclear part, which is, I know, under debate at the moment, which could add further electricity. So Sweden, on the electricity side, has a lot of things going for it, as I said before. And then also, I think it was mentioned earlier that there's around 20 million tons of biogenic CO2 available in Sweden from the biomass-based industries, which is again the other building block for green methanol. So when you have green electricity, you can produce green hydrogen, you can take green or sustainable CO2, and you can make them into e-methanol. So we are strong believers that this is going to happen, and that sort of Sweden and the Nordics is going to be one of the hotspots in the world for this development. And of course, then there's a port like Gothenburg, which is also leaning forward to actually making this available to the shipping companies. So investing in the infrastructure that it takes, proving the bunkering operations, and also being sort of a promoter of green corridors. So in that sense, establishing the infrastructure part, the middle of the value chain, and also creating some incentives for those that then use the green fuels. However, we are ultimately also in a situation where, and I think that was mentioned earlier today as well, that across the value chain, perhaps the cost gap at the moment is such that we need further incentives. So I think the first projects are really key to get over the line, because this is where all parts of the value chain can then start working, and then it'll be easier the next time, and cheaper the next time, and easier the third time than it was the second time, etc. So really, as we've seen in renewables, it's about getting sort of a positive spiral going, where one project learns from the previous, which then is further improved, etc., going forward. So for that purpose, I think everybody in the value chain needs to work together, but it's also important that we get societal backing to actually get the first projects moving, and enable all parts of the value chain to transition. So with that, I would like to thank you.
Thank you very much.